Good morning. If I have never met you before, my name is Caroline. I'm part of the speakers team at Crossroads, and I'm glad you're here this morning. As Alan already said earlier, we're continuing with the unfolding story. If you're not here for the first time, you might have already know that we jumped into this last week. And have you ever thought that you kind of know the individual stories of the Bible? You can name some of them when you're from Sunday school or from parents or grandparents, but you'd struggle a little bit to kind of string them all next to each other in order. That could be a little tricky. And even if you could string them together timeline-wise, what is the whole of it all saying? What is it saying about God, about humanity, about where the two come together? And so to be able to see and to understand, to grasp fully this unfolding story from Genesis to Revelation and to life today, it kind of almost asks us to have this bifocal view, to we see through two lenses, to catch the upper story, but to also see the lower story. And I'll get back to that in a minute. As you saw today with the kids, you know, and I already said it as well just now, we will be talking about creation. And on the panels here in the back that the artist made for us, you see the second one today is a painter's brush. We are going to talk about what God spoke into being. Sazi started last week and he launched us and talked about the Trinity. And he kind of took us to the story behind the story. For us to talk about the unfolding story and all that God created, all the characters and the narratives, the storyline that started from page 1 of the Bible. We're taking an assumption there of who did the creating and who does the unfolding. And so Sazi kind of introduced us to what happens before page 1 of the Bible there. Talk about the Trinity, God the Father, God the Spirit, and God the Son. And the creation story in Genesis 1 really is the most bottom stone or pile of wood in the Bible's Jenga tower. To ignore that one, to remove that one, to neglect that one, it really causes everything else to kind of come crashing down. Because we're talking about their God as creator in the first verse. That is really the foundation of it all. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if we can understand the implications of that, it kind of sets us up to be able to accept, to cheer on, to engage with, and to know what the so what of the rest of the Bible can be. And to bring it more into life, I would like to contrast two works of art with you. I'm not a very artsy person. I don't paint myself, although I'd like to be able to, but I want to unpack two really famous ones. The first one is the Mona Lisa. I think Martijn has it. And the Mona Lisa here is, if you've ever seen it in real life, it's in the Louvre in Paris, and you walk past the Rembrandt and the Van Goghs and the Monets, and you find this one, and it's smaller than you think it should be, right? Yeah, there you go. Some people have seen it. It's smaller than you think it should be. It is estimated at $700 million. That is the value of it. It is said to have been finalized on June 15th, 1479, during the Italian Renaissance. And the woman in the picture, or the painting, she is the wife of a wealthy silk merchant. And this was painted and given to her as a gift for their new home while she was expecting their second son, Andreas. It's a beautiful thing. So there's a story, there's intention there. It was a personal gift to this family. But it stands alone. That is all it captures in a way. And you take one step to the left or to the right in the Louvre, and you find a whole new painting, a whole new masterpiece that has its own style and its own feel and its own look. It creates a whole new thing. But let's contrast it to something else. You go to a different big European city, popular tourist staple. We go to Rome in Italy, and you go to the Sistine Chapel, and you walk in there, and at some point you find the big ceiling tapestry. We have that as well. The whole room is covered in beautiful paintings. And there's a video even, I think this is it. Martijn will zoom in. Because at one point last week Sazi mentioned that is a creation of Adam, where Michelangelo is trying to portray the creation of man. Okay, God touching humanity. And so that is a beautiful story. There's so much detail. It is ornate. It is massive. And one thing I did not know is that at the highest point, there's 9 major Genesis stories. Take your time. I have a link. We could drop it somewhere. You can Google it. I was hoping we could do that today, but you could do a 360. You can zoom in any part and high quality, high resolution. It looks at everything. So there's 9 major Genesis stories there. Just below those are 12 prophets who foretold Jesus' birth. Then in the crescent shapes around the chapel, you'll find the ancestors of Jesus, like Boaz and David and Joseph, the carpenter. And then in the corners of the room, you have the dramatic biblical stories, like David and Goliath. And the Bible does have some dramatical stories that you might remember from Sunday school as well. And so each of these is just portraying and telling one big story. So whereas Da Vinci captured one individual, beautifully so, Michelangelo just took a whole sweep of history. He unites them all into this display of one magnificent work of art, humanity's need for salvation as offered through God in Jesus Christ. All of that scenery and tapestry in the ceiling is pointing towards Jesus. And on the surface, you and I, along with billions of other people on this planet who live and breathe, we are like individual paintings on a kind of a cosmic gallery. Some are Picassos and some are different styles. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. I work usually with teens, so there's going to be something in there. But yeah, but all of us are individual pieces hanging on a wall. But when you take a step back, you see that each story is intricately woven somehow into communicating one big message, into a seamless narrative. And they're communicating one overarching epic. And I mentioned just now, there's an upper story and a lower story. In the lower story, that's where we have our individual stories. That's where there's a chronological order, and that is where the here and the now of life, the daily life. That is where we have our goals and our fears and our experiences, our responsibilities. That is where we pay bills, get sick, get an education, fall in love, experience heartbreak. All of that is the lower story, the things that happen to breathing, living people who are finite in a way. And so we can trust that God steps in and intervenes when we need him, which he does, very much so. And he gives wisdom and strength and purpose, and to allow us to be able to live this life with purpose and with joy, despite what the circumstances are. But he has a way higher of an agenda than just our survival or our comfort. When we rise above the daily here and now perspective, we get his perspective, which is something way bigger. We look at the ceiling and we see that there was a big idea, capital B. There was something grander, larger, something eternal. That is the upper story. God deciding to create, speak into being all of us here with a purpose of having perfect communion with us. Now, I won't kind of go into a spoiler alert into next time. Most of us here know what happens in Genesis 3. That is the fall. That is when sin enters the world. I'm focusing today on the happy place. I'm focusing on what was originally intended. So you have the lower story, all the fact that we feel and causes us to age, and then you have the upper story that is God's perspective on things, what the initial idea was. God is saying, I want you to be part of this. So let's look at creation. There exists a lot of creation myths. I'm not one into mythological things, but just reading book and doing research for this message, there's quite a few stories of how certain beliefs and cultures and religions think that how creation started. And I want to say most, but all of it centers on it coming to be out of conflict. All of it. And God's at war and something that is born into something that is harsh, and the cosmos is chaotic and violent. And so in that, when you look at all those together, then Genesis 1 is kind of peculiar. It is remarkably calm and ordered and personal. This ordered and rhythmed and systematic way the first couple of verses unpack the creation communicates two things. It tells us that a universe didn't burst into being through conflict, or it didn't stumble into it by chance. There was intention behind it. God had a plan, and that plan had no opposition. And this further confirms and affirms the pattern that Sazi kind of took us through the Trinity last week, of how the Trinity and three persons work together, that the bedrock reality of our universe is peace and harmony and love, not war and discord and violence. And so when we give answer to that inside yearning and longing for peace and harmony, we're not just whistling the wind, wanting something that is idealistic and not really realistic. We're just kind of calling the universe back to its most basic fundamental fabric, what it was intended to be all along. Let's further unpack verse 1. God, the creator, is not part of his creation. That sounds simple and as if it shouldn't be necessary for me to mention that. And yet, how often do we, when we think about the world, we think about good and evil as if God and the devil are kind of butting heads together? The idea of there's a battle going on and I'm on the right side, I'm hoping the right side wins. It is God and then creation. Satan is a fallen creature under God's authority. When I was a teen actually, I really needed to understand this principle because I always felt like, oh, can God take him? You wouldn't necessarily say it, but there's this idea that good and evil are just battling against each other on the same level. And that is not the case. God is not part of his creation. He is the sole, unique, and absolute cause of all that happened, all that came to be. He does not depend on the universe for anything, and the universe depends on him for everything. There is a clear and irreversible asymmetry between these two. He stands outside and far above his creation. He's not just a bigger and better version of us. He's not simply the smartest, the strongest, or otherwise best creature among all the creatures. He is other, capital O, to all the creatures, making it impossible for us to even have this idea to project who we think he is. I think Sazi mentioned that last week as well. He's not a culmination of our best imagination. Look, all the languages are kind of bowling up together there. He's not the best of just our imagination. And in our weak attempt to kind of understand the Creator, we kind of shape this form of who we think he is or ought to be, or probably or possibly could be. But then we kind of often fall into two camps. We either see him as being completely transcendent and otherworldly, that he is almost too far removed from us for us to really understand him. He is so extreme and far away from us. But then there's the other extreme as well, when people think he's just so close to me, so intimate, that he just kind of dissolves into my everyday life. And at some point, there are people who think, well, if God is everywhere and nowhere, then maybe I am one. And that's way extreme. But you have these extremes that one is he's too far removed and transcendent, or he's so close that he becomes undistinguishable from the rest of life. And God is neither these two things. Because any God in these two extremes, they wouldn't really bother. It doesn't bother us to really live life not following, but knowing that God exists. Because he won't move us towards anything. He won't offend us in a way, but neither will he satisfy. And so it's not that God is not other from us. Again, capital O. He is very other from us. And he is intimately close to us. He is both and. He is so other and transcendent because of his blazing holiness, his uncompromising purity and glory that we cannot come close to. And yet he's intimately involved in his world and his created beings. And he rules over it sovereignly as the one in whom we live and move and have our being. That is in Acts 17. He also knows our needs before we even ask him. And not just humanity's needs, Katarina's needs and Ernest's needs and Khatuna's needs. He knows our needs before we even mention them. And he does not forget even a sparrow. I had to look it up just to be 100% sure. A sparrow in Dutch is a musje, the smallest of birds. One of the smallest of birds. He knows, he doesn't forget the smallest of birds or a hair on our heads. Luke 12. And any intimacy or closer we might feel with him is not because of a relatability or similarity with him. It is because he chooses to draw near. He comes and steps close into our lives. And so his otherness and his closeness are not opposites, but complementary aspects of his divine nature and character. I like this quote. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, God is the beyond in the midst of us. And so we have this beautiful work of art behind me here, like I said, the universe. It's kind of folded together now because slowly, bit by bit, the pieces are coming together. But it's pointing at the galaxy, right? And at one point, the galaxy was created. It was spoken into being. And this is going to be an odd statement. Whether you believe in 7 24-hour days or eras, that is not the discussion for today. But at some point, it had a beginning. It had a start. And if something had a start, can I say then that it was not ultimately necessary? God decided to create it. He didn't create it because he had to. He didn't do it to satisfy something that was incomplete in him. He doesn't need the universe to be who he is, and he doesn't need us to be fulfilled. It sounds like a not very uplifting message, but bear with me, because there is good news. And the good news is that he wanted us. We're a conscious choice. The line that was getting me choked up, and I feel it now, great are you, Lord. He decided to speak all of this into being. He didn't need it. As Paul explains to those gathered in Areopagus in Acts 17, we have that on the screen as well. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. He already owns all our treasure, all our time, all our talents, and our very selves. There is nothing that we can add to God. Sometimes we wish we could. There's nothing that we can do that will make him greater than he already is. We are in every way dependent on him, and it is not the other way around in any way, shape, or form. Neither we or the universe are necessary. We may be important, we may be precious, we may be glorious even. But as the book that we're reading, the critical biblical theory thing says, we are preciously and gloriously unnecessary. That rubs me the wrong way, but it is fact. It is true. So looking at all of Scripture from beginning to end, we see one thing sticking out. You were wanted on purpose. Each one of us, every person here could think that for themselves. I was wanted by the divine God. And in those moments when we think about that, that's the first glimpse we really get of his undeserved favor over us. We very often focus on grace as being that which brings about redemption, but his grace, his complete and utter favor and generosity towards us, undeserved so, is what kind of spoke the galaxies into being as well. You and me are undeniably recipients of all that he offers, of all this wonder in this world. From him we received existence, we received meaning, we received love. Have you ever been in a position where you thought you could kind of bargain with God? I know I have. I'm not proud of it. I work with young people, and so I should be able to be transparent enough to say that it's not like I have anything to bring to the table, but you think, okay, God, if you let me have this, I'm going to pray way harder. If you let me do this, if you let this work out, I will give this from my side. It's like I say we're in some kind of corporate boardroom with God and thinking we have the chips to kind of negotiate with him in some way or another. We do not. I like how the book kind of put words with him like, oh, that sounds almost like juvenile, but he was saying we're not in any way capable or able to bargain with God. It's more the image of kids on Christmas morning coming down. They didn't work for it. They didn't pay the gifts. They didn't pick them, but they're just coming down to having lavish gifts bestowed upon them. They just come in like, oh, this is for me? It was not transactional in any way. That is kind of the image he's saying that is how we receive from God. All that we see around us, every gift that we receive from him, we come with empty hands and he says, here you go, my child. And every time we look at the redemption or anything given from biblical perspective, it is just that, us coming with empty hands and receiving and not being able to even carry all that we've gotten from him. And so when we live in this reality, that all of us really do have empty hands, it paints this picture that the poor, the weak, the needy, they're not cast aside because they don't bring any chips to the table to bargain with the rest. They don't add to the great business deal of life, but they are cared for and honored because they come knowing that their hands are empty. With a young adult group right now, we're going through the Beatitudes, and every so often I still think about, the blessed is, and it's talking about blessed are those who are poor in spirit. It's like, but it's not a goal in itself to be poor in spirit, right? It sounds that way. But it's like, blessed are you who are aware that you are completely empty and spent and needy, and the only thing you can do is just come and say, please. And so when we look at the people who are not being able to bring anything to the table, so to speak, that God says, they're the ones who know that they're just recipients of it all. I want to be like that. God gives freely to those who cannot stand on their own 2 feet, those who cannot cut a deal with him. We all have empty hands. Let's go back to Genesis 1. Let's read verses 1 and 2 together. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. The earth was formless and empty. Not minimalistic, empty, unidentifiable. Just a formless and empty earth and a dark deep. Kind of the way movies sometimes portray outer space or the scenery of what is left after a big natural disaster. Just nothingness to really put together to create something, to create life again. But there's good news. The text mentions that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And when we read that, we try to sometimes imagine what this nothingness looks like. And it sounds kind of desperate. If not even light and darkness are separated from each other and stand on their own, I'm not really sure even to try to imagine that. Time was not what we know it to be now. It was unidentifiable. And we can think that, and in our perspective, see, this is beyond hope. God just saw a blank canvas. And thankfully so. He is not constrained by any given circumstances, even if those circumstances are formless, empty, and dark. He takes that nothing and speaks a universe into it. And not only that, but he sees it and he calls it good. Good has come out of nothing. He could have thought it into existence. That is possible. I don't think it's beyond God's power. But thinking is for your private reflection. God spoke it into existence. It was the Trinity working together after all. But speaking it out into reality kind of sets the pattern as well for the rest of the Bible. God's words bring life. And then in chapters 1 and 2, by the way, I told the kids this morning here, I will not be reading the full of chapter 1. I went back and forth, should I do that? Because you feel like you can't talk about creation, not do that. But they did that for us. So the kids today started the message, okay? Just so you know, like, when is she going to go? I'm not going to read the full chapter. And then in chapters 1 and 2, when it does unpack the specifics of the creation, I will say on days 1 and 2 and 3, God paints the places on the earth and creates the canvas, so to speak. That is when he separates light and dark, and air and water, and dry land and oceans. And in days 4, 5, and 6, he fills each of these spaces with the objects, sun, moon, and stars, and all the creatures, land creatures, sea creatures, flying creatures, and humanity, and people. He fills all those. So that's an easy way to distinguish between 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and 6. And God's creation is not minimalistic either. This land is positively loaded with a variety of species and ecosystems and life. Sometimes not the life that we would want, because he made bugs too. I don't get that, but okay. Of all the ways that God could have designed, and I was talking about that recently with someone, of all the ways God could have designed for us to get nourishment, he could have just said, there's just one type of grass, you eat that, or you drink enough water, and you're filled, and you're nourished, and you're energized to go. But no, he decided to give us taste buds, and gave us food in so many colors, and variety, and flavors, and fragrances, and for those who like to play with the food, it is fun stuff to touch as well. God gave us all of that. Why such abundant excess? Why not give us one great sea creature, one impressive land creature, and one phenomenal bird? And I know that it needs to do something with the food chains as well, because these animals need to have food to be able to live as well. But it could have worked around that. But no, it feels almost like too much. But God didn't want to create a place that just was fit for our living and survival. He wanted it to beam with life and color, and for us to be able to thrive in it, and to feel his generous abundance the way he provides for us. There's an estimate of 8.7 million species. Why as well did he not just create eating for survival, or have sex for procreate and multiply? There is pleasure and enjoyment to be involved in the things that he created for us to do. He wanted us to enjoy his creation. Why create a monochrome world, everything in grayish tints or greenish tints, when you can make a human eye that can distinguish between 7 and 10 million colors? And the stars. Astronomers estimate, I geek out here. I'm looking at Charlie now. This is not my area. But I saw this and I'm like, as I was studying to put this here, I kid you not, I wanted to stop and go tell someone, like, you got to read this. Or just pause and think, God, why? That's just amazing. Not today. Astronomers estimate that there's around 300 billion stars in our galaxy, and perhaps 2 trillion galaxies. That's where you get too many zeros for me to really make sense of it all. What is the point of that? God's creativity, his generosity, and his power. And yet, while the creation of 1 billion other galaxies and some of the most breathtaking scenes ever are impressive, it's not the full point of the story yet, is it? We see beauty and functionality and wonder in things like Mount Everest and Victoria Falls and Sahara Desert, in the coral reef, Aurora Borealis, which is still on my bucket list, red baby pandas and hummingbirds and white tigers, all these amazing things that you're like, oh, you got to see this. And it did not come close to identifying God's complete final purpose yet of creation. Because all he did in days 1 through 5 are display cases for his main creation and objects to rule over for his actual end goal, which is found in verses 26 and 27. Read with me. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And I like it every time that God created something, or after the end of one of the days that is described, God says, it is good. And as a kid, you can think like, wait, is he like being surprised, like, oh, what I did is good? No. It is not a realization that, hey, this actually could work. It is a declaration. What I've made here is good. It is deciding this is it. And after his final declaration of human beings being good, he calls it a week. Yeah. And it wasn't due to tiredness or laziness. Of course, we know that. Why isn't the point just day 1 through 6 to really kind of get working and get things done? I've often heard people say that people are the crowning act of God's creation. And in a way, we really do get, he saved the best for last kind of thing. But it's very last what to say, okay, this is all good. Now we rest. God crowns his creation by resting from the work of creating. He makes clear that work is not the risk for him. And if we look at the 10 Commandments and at other places in the Bible, he wants to make it clear that work is not that there is for us either. I love how when we're reading this book, The Unfolding Story, after the work when he rests, it explains that the climax of work is not a promotion, it is not a raise or recognition, but rest. Your reward is rest. Have we ever seen it that way? I'm always running and scrambling to be able to do all that I think I need to do. So there's a sense of me thinking, I'm doing the right thing by running like that. But it flips that upside down when I think that God's reward for me is to be able to rest of all that I was able to do because he called me to do it and he gave me strength and power to do so. And so whether you tend to be on the, I don't want to use the word workaholic, but if you tend to be on the side of just going, because there's stuff to do, people to see, places to go, things to do, or you can't be bothered and you're really slow to get started and easy to stop, whatever extreme, we're only taking away a part of this biblical truth of work and rest. It is simply a rest for the sake of enjoyment of all that has been done. It is not a rest of like, if I sleep now, I'll be able to do more tomorrow. But anyway, I'm going to move on. In conclusion, as usually when the band kind of thinks, oh, wait, we're coming there. In conclusion, we were wanted by God intentionally, purposefully, and lovingly. We were created to be in a universe where order and creativity go together, where it says here that all snowflakes are the same, but none are equal. All humans are sort of kind of same, but there's none identical. All these different things, God created variety for the fun of it. He wanted it to be that way. There's this beautiful symphony going on of similarity and difference, and it reflecting back the Trinitarian reality in all of us, the one and the many. We were wanted by God, and having made in his image, we see his fingerprint and family resemblance in us. We enjoy order, planning, precision, creativity, functionality, beauty, community, and purpose. The founding pastor of Crossroads, Dan Steigel, back in the day, I think I was 18 when he had this message, but it still stuck with me. He talked about a mog, a hog, and a dog. And that is AWG at the end, not OG like roof, roof. But the mog is a moment alone with God, or an hour alone with God, or a day alone with God. Now, I know not everyone can afford to have a full day, you retrieving and spending time with God, but the moment is good. I want to ask all of us, myself included, how can we this week take some time to not look at only the gifts, which very often we are asked to focus on, but to look beyond that to the generous giver. Spend time in worship. The one who decided to bestow with this excessive love and surprising generosity. May it drive us to worship and fuel our gratitude. Have you ever even thought of the idea, what was God thinking when he created you individually? Sometime this week, I would invite all of us to take some time and spend it with God. Start with worship and ask God, speak to me. I receive all that you're giving me. Speak to me. Next week, we'll continue with the unfolding story. And as Alan just said, if you want to join in every Thursday evening, they're unpacking another one of the stories of the Bible, the main parts. Please do join. I can highly recommend it. Let us pray. Father, we thank you for your immense generosity. You chose us, you created us, you give us purpose and meaning, strength. Each person is uniquely wired and shaped, Father. And yet all of us get to come and sit with you and be close with you, Father, and receive from you purpose and direction and filling in every way, shape, and form. I pray this week, Father, that as we think about the creation, that it would all fuel us back to our knees, that it would fuel our worship to you, Father, not just to sing a song, but to have it be our song to you, Father, to say thank you. And how can we worship you, Father, by protecting, by caring for this, by making it known what you've done and your character, what it says about you. Would you be blessed and glorified, Father, by your kids? And we do want to ask, Father, those who are carrying a heavy burden, that you would meet them in that. That in our lower story of all that we do and say in the here and the now, Father, that we would get glimpses indeed of the upper story of what it is that you're trying to do and what you're doing now to restore humanity back to you, what Jesus Christ has done. So I pray that you would clear the fog and allow us to be able to grasp that and understand that, Father, and own it, and to realize that it was a gift given from you to us directly. So we thank you, Father, for all that you're doing in each person here this morning. It's not a mistake that anyone is sitting here with us. And I pray that whatever lands from this message today, Father, you would continue to feed that in each heart and each mind. All this we ask in your precious name. Amen.